Friends, we are continuing our journey through the Gospel according to Mark, and as Heather told us, today is Transfiguration Sunday. Let us receive now these words from Mark's Gospel, chapter 9, beginning with verse 2. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could ever bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. These are holy words.
Rocky Hill Congregational Church.
Good morning.
Good morning. Oh, I like that. You are a church that talks back. Amen. It is such a delight to be here with you this morning. I thank your pastor, the Reverend David Figliuzzi, for this invitation, and gratitude to the band for inviting me to sing with them this morning. Let's give them a hand, please. And just a moment of Black history. So the composer or the lyricist to Precious Lord Take My Hand is Thomas Dorsey, an African-American gentleman. He was originally a blues musician. That's just shaking your head, you know about it. Yes, and then one day, but he grew up as the son of a preacher. And so his father really kind of got tired of him. He was feeling like Thomas was moving away from the church with the blues. And so he accompanied his father to a Baptist music convention. And Thomas was drawn back to the music of the church. And so a few years later, he was at another Baptist music convention when he received a telegram informing him that his wife and baby had died in labor. And so when he got home, he penned the lyrics to Precious Lord, Take My Hand. Won't you please pray with me? Save me, O Lord, from fearing so much my own frailty that I forget your mighty power. Help me to speak the words I believe you have given me and leave to you results and consequences. Amen. Grasping for Jesus. Who do you say that I am? Peter Ennis, manager for the Office of Liturgy and Arts at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, states, no theology is strictly speaking timeless. All theology has a historical and cultural context, including the theology of the biblical writers. And that is good news, for it gives us permission to accept the responsibility to think through what it means for God to be present now. Beloveds, given the widening religious, cultural, and political divide in our country, the question of Jesus' identity is of most critical concern, I believe, for the 21st century Christian church, as our understanding of such has implications for how we show up in the world. Who we say Jesus is informs our relationship first with ourselves, with others, and the whole of creation. The revelation of Jesus' identity also reveals the way of discipleship, which I like to say is a way of life. Barbara Brown Taylor tells this story. She says that a woman was exiting the church after a Sunday service, and as she stepped out onto the sidewalk, she almost bumped into a man who was standing in front of the church doors. She immediately stepped to the side to go around him when she heard him say, "What is it that you believe in there?" The woman stopped suddenly to respond to his question, but she was not sure what to say. The man repeated his question, but when the man realized, that the woman was struggling to come up with a response, he replied, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother you." And so he walked on down the street, and the woman began to think about the question, "What is it that you believe in here? What is it that you believe in here?" That is what Jesus' question does to us. It gives us pause to consider who Jesus is. In today's gospel reading, we are once again invited to bear witness to the glory and radiance of the Transfiguration event. Mark describes Jesus and three of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, and their ascent to a high mountaintop for some time away for themselves. 6 days prior, Jesus and his disciples had been engaged in the community, feeding large crowds. Mark calls it the 4,000, when the other Gospels call it the 5,000. They were performing miracles, responding to religious leaders who challenged Jesus' authorities. We pastors know something about that. And performing miracles. It's no wonder they needed some time away for themselves, a little self-care on the mountaintop. And almost immediately upon arriving to the mountain, Mark describes a spectacular occurrence where Jesus is transformed before the disciples' eyes. His clothes became dazzling white, says Mark, and there appeared to the disciples Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter, aware of the significance of what had transpired, wanted to memorialize this encounter with glory, and does so by suggesting to Jesus that they build tents for Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. Now, poor Peter. He and the other disciples were scared, and they didn't know what to say. However, culturally speaking, Peter responded as a Jewish man of his day would. Peter's vision for erecting 3 dwellings makes sense. To that end, Peter's response is often criticized. Given our westernized understanding of Christianity and that it does not hold space for ancestral veneration, the critique makes sense. Commentary writer Casey Owen suggests that by being transfigured in the presence of his ancestors, not only does Jesus make a case for their place within our Christology, the transfiguration narrative also proposes that an unexpected interaction with our ancestors could be a signal that God is also close. Having lost my mother a year ago this past January, I can testify to moments of sensing her spirit with me and also an overwhelming sense and awe that God, too, is present among us. And just as Peter was about to offend his case, Mark tells us that a cloud overshadowed them and a voice rang out from heaven saying, "This is my son, the beloved one. Listen to him." Listen to him. And suddenly, when the disciples looked around, no one was there. If you're like me, you may be wondering why God spoke from the cloud, inviting the disciples to listen to the beloved Son. Throughout Mark's gospel, Jesus makes prophetic intimations to the fact that he is the Messiah. In chapter 8, Jesus asks the disciples directly, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered correctly, "You are the Messiah." Peter gets it right. And a few verses later, however, when Jesus foreshadows his rejection by the authorities, impending death and resurrection, Peter vehemently rejects any notion that the Messiah would die in such a way that made him appear weak and defeated. And please know, Peter was not alone with this process of reasoning. The other disciples thought the same. Peter stood out from the other disciples in that he had the courage to speak his mind. Peter was a firebrand. And knowing Peter's heart on the mountaintop, though, God redirects Peter's thinking regarding the memorialization of his experience of the Transfiguration by building 3 shrines to Moses, Jesus, and Elijah. Instead, the voice from the cloud says, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen." As we prepare to move from this shift of Epiphany and ordinary time to the season of Lent, might we consider this Transfiguration Sunday the liminal space between the two? Like, we don't get to just move to Lent. That we are invited to be still for a moment and reflect. This is the Sunday where one experiences the growing pains and the crossing thresholds instigated by the shock of coming face to face with glory on the mountaintop. For you see, on this day of transfiguration, the question of Jesus' identity is once again revealed to the disciples. It is revealed to us. He is the Messiah, the one who will be killed and rejected by the authorities. And thanks be to God, resurrected on the third day. Jesus' question to the disciples is relevant for us today. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that Jesus is? Who does Rocky Hill Congregational Church say that Jesus is? And now that you're going to be studying Mark during the Lenten season, you may have some opportunity to consider together. And if asked by a passerby leaving church today, what is it that you believe in there? How would you answer? I know even as a minister, I might be stunned because we don't often enter those kinds of conversations on the street, in daily life, in the workplace. But someone may ask, they know you attend this wonderful, vibrant, active congregation, and they may be looking for something in their lives. If they ask you what it is you believe there, how might you respond? How might we be transfigured personally as a faith community during this Lenten season, a time of darkness and inward reflection? What internal work will happen in the soil of your souls? Peter, James, and John had a mountaintop experience with Jesus when they witnessed his transfiguration, the glory of God revealed in the Messiah, both human and divine. But eventually, they had to come down. How does their mountaintop experience prepare us for the modern day experiences of the highs and lows of life? Grasping for Jesus. Who do you say that I am? The Transfiguration event not only offered revelation of Jesus' identity, it also pointed toward the way of discipleship, a model of how to love God and love our neighbor and be in community together to do the work of justice, engaging the difficult and uncomfortable conversations that come with being a person of faith. At the core of Jesus' ministry was love. Is love. May we each love each other with the love of Christ. When we read the Transfiguration story, may we too be like the disciples, awed by the glory of God, but also brave enough to embrace our fears. As I mentioned at the beginning of our time together, there's a lot before us as a country. A lot. No matter where you fall on the scale, the spectrum of political beliefs, the one thing we know as Christians, as I said, is that the love of God undergirds all. I think it's crucial in these coming months that we be able to name for ourselves who it is that who Jesus is to us, and how the fact that we are people of faith in relationship with God, in relationship with Jesus, in relationship with the church, how that impacts and informs how we show up in the world. A moment of transparency. I am in a season of, I won't call it hopelessness, but I do find it very challenging to be hopeful. And my faith calls me to be hopeful. And so I persevere. And if that is where you are, I encourage you to persevere as well. The promise of the Messiah is still available to us today, and all those who will receive. May it be so. I invite you to pray with me. Gracious God, as Jesus dazzled before his friends on the mountaintop, reveal the hope of your glory to us. Amen.